Hi, Jennifer. Hi,
Hello.
Tariq. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm good. How is
Beautiful.
Hello,
everyone?
good.
Excellent. So, Jennifer, where are you right now?
I'm actually in Atlanta, Georgia.
And you, Tariq, where are you?
I am actually in Pays Basque in the southwest of France.
Beautiful. That's a lovely connection. That's great that we can do this online. And both of you have a great perspective and a very different angle to bring to this conversation. A much needed one that I really wanted to cover during today's conference. But I was a bit afraid of bringing this for the end of the day. So let's see if we can, make this a positive and sort of high positive note for our viewers. Jennifer, you work at Twitter. You're going to tell us a bit more about your role over there. And Tariq, you're the founder of Polite in the Slow Way initiative. Our topic is, I'm going to read it, rethinking platform design for a safer world. So maybe that's a big title, but I would like to ask both of you, what is it that you're doing on your daily life that makes you an expert or someone who has something to say and share about this topic? Starting with you, Jennifer, out of Atlanta, Georgia.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Kanyamibga. I'm a senior design program manager at Twitter, working on the health team. So this is the team that deals with misinformation, security, identity, and privacy issues and challenges on our platform, working very closely with the design team that works on this, but also our partners in trust and safety, in legal, TWS, and folks that really work to keep our platform healthy and safe.
Thank you. Tariq, tell us about your background as well. And apparently, I see in the chat that you were discussing a topic close to today's topic back in 2014.
It sounds like so. Basically, I used to be a computer hacker in the 80s and the 90s. I became a journalist to cover the early days of the internet, and then I decided to become an entrepreneur. And the dear love I have for all these technologies, kind of, I didn't feel, you were talking about NWA just before. I was more an independent music person, and with the big platform, I couldn't really struggle to find my place. And one of the question I was trying to figure out is how can we keep building different things online? And today, I've started. So I have two projects. I have kind of a think tank called the Slow Web Initiative, and the idea is to basically help rebuild the ethical renaissance of the internet. And then I have a small side project called Polite, that is a digital hub, kind of a self-sovereign digital hub. And I call it Polite because we want to build technology with good manners.
Thank you. I want to understand a bit better, what is it that you do at Twitter under health and safety? Like the fact that you're using the word health, to be honest, from here, from my French window, I found it quite curious to say the least, as a word you're using to describe the big mission that you have at Twitter. Tell me a little bit more, like the details of what it is that you're doing with your team.
Yes, so our team really covers a gamut of things, as you can imagine, at Twitter, especially with the kind of year that we've had. If you think about COVID, if you think about the election, actually, I moved to Atlanta prior to the Senate races, as well as the presidential election. And it's interestingly enough, I was living the reality of that and then living the reality of Twitter all at once and seeing these two things. But when we talk about health at Twitter, we talk about your experience on the platform. How do you feel about your experience? Is it positive or is it negative? And that can mean different things for different people. For example, for marginalized folks, they are subject to a lot of not the most pleasant experiences within any social media company. So how do we build those kind of experiences, and how do we educate people on our policies so that they know what they can and cannot do and what the repercussions are? So it is a very intricate thing. You can imagine that, we are working not only from a user experience perspective, but also a legal perspective, a policy perspective. And it's in a field that's never really been done before. a lot of emerging practices and best practices. So we also really rely on subject matter experts. For example, this year we've brought in Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who's written a fantastic book called Race After Technology, which really covers how you can build technology in a way that's actually biased, even if that's not your intention. Or Camille Francois at Graphica, who studies misinformation campaigns. And so we really rely on research to really think about what we're building and how we're building it. And that encompasses health. Health in a way of how you feel when you're using the Twitter platform.
That's fascinating. I'm sure, Tariq, you have plenty of reactions and comments about it as well. Like I was thinking, preparing this conversation, that Twitter will look like among the big platforms, the, let's say, less evil, like the one that is a bit more concerned about all these political challenges and the health of their users.
No, yes, absolutely. But I think what basically happened over the last if you summarize the internet over the last 30 years, the first 15 years was to make it open and everybody was discovering blogs and technology. And then the last 15 years have been about re-centralizing ideas of software. And obviously, 10 years ago, I wrote a piece called The Age of Emotion. And I was concerned that when you're managing millions of people, and when you manage billions of people, or you have an influence over billion plus people, it's a different challenge. It's really hard, and I know it comes also from a good intention. I mean, in all these companies, I know a lot of people are trying to figure out how to make it, better. But you have to embrace this complexity. But to go back to what I was saying with the slow wave is, on one side you have these platformers trying to figure out how they can address this complexity, but on the other side, I'm a big believer of smaller platform, more ethical platform, what I call the slow web movement. Slow web as like in slow food, but was, as you know, 40 years ago, a reaction to fast food. And how do you build something that is designed for smaller, for a more intimate, for a more ethical approach to technology? So this is going to be an interesting thing, because on one side you have this enormous concentration of power, and on the other side, you're also going to have to see different things exploding. We were talking about the artist entrepreneur, but you can see that now with technology, the creator economy. There's going to be so many different ways to express yourself, and I found that quite exciting.
And who's doing it right now in 2021? Like, tell me maybe a few examples of platforms or smaller platforms that are actually building under those premises and are fitting with the slow web principles,
Yeah.
or maybe with what you are doing at Twitter as well for the users. Who are the good, the good kids? Who's doing it right?
Well, I can say that part of what Tariq is talking about really falls into one of the principles that we have on the design team at Twitter, which is to work out loud, which is to actually work in increments where we're showing our work to customers and getting feedback in real time. For example, we're building out a feature called Spaces, where we are actually building and asking people for feedback in real time. This feedback isn't only about the cool features, but about things that will make them feel safe, more engaged, even with looking at something like communities, which is something kind of similar to what Tariq spoke about. How do you take these huge populations of people using a platform and build specific communities so you could find people to connect with and to build with and to still have that kind of small sense of community. And I know in the health world, we recently started to actually tweet out our work. So one of the things that I am managing is a workshop that we're working on where we're actually reimagining our platform across 3 specific areas. So safety controls, which refers to the ability for customers to control the content that they see, as well as being able to understand how to control like their activity. Signals of trust and identity, which refers to providing customers more signals to determine which conversations are worthwhile and provide more informative details on accounts. And education and transparency, which refers to giving people incentives for the behaviors we want to see, as well as disincentives for those we don't want. And then to educate people on our policies, which falls under a concept called procedural fairness. So we've been actually tweeting these things out, getting customers to give us real-time feedback even before you see these things in the platform, and challenging ourselves to hold ourselves accountable to build these things that we're promising to customers that we know will be better for their experience. Not saying that things are going to be perfect, but I think that there is at Twitter anyway, we're trying to establish a more transparent way in how we build so that people can understand the logic and also understand the experience that we want them to ultimately have on the platform.
Thank you. Tariq, any reaction? I mean, I know you're a big Clubhouse fan, and Spaces is definitely taking over Clubhouse very soon. What do you think?
I don't know. I think I think every product is different, and every product has a different ethos. I was lucky to be an early tester of Twitter Space. I think it's great. I think one of the things about Clubhouse that I like is that I have been early connected to friends, and I pretty much got my routine there. But I think there's my message is more like it's the idea that we need a lot of choice. And I should have probably tried to define what I mean by slow web. And it's come basically to four things, very simple things. First one is transparency. What you see on your screen and the software tells you it's doing is actually what the software is doing. The second one is the non-manipulation. When you're a designer and you control the screen of a user, you can actually let him do whatever he wants, even against his will. And this idea of being non-manipulative and making sure that you have a commitment to that is very important. The third thing I believe is what I call the private usage, because it would be way too long, but there's this thing that we call now computational intimacy, where the software lives in your intimacy, and because it lives in your intimacy, it needs to respect your intimacy and your privacy. And the last thing that seems to be a simple thing, but it's not always the case, is the right to leave and just say, give me back my data and I'm going to move on. I may come back later, but at the moment, I want to terminate that relation. And these small ideas that allows you to get back trust into the software that we use every day is essential. I think it doesn't matter if companies are large. Of course, if they're large, they have different types of problems to address. And when they're small, they have to kind of figure out how to differentiate themselves. There's a company I love and I quote all the time. It's Bandcamp in the music business. On one side, you have massive Apple, Spotify, etc. And on the other side, you have a site that goes back to a bit what companies like Substack are doing for writers, like giving you a very simple way to distribute your money and be fairly retributed. And I think we're going to see more and more and more of these platforms that are going to allow creators or individuals to take back control of their digital life. And then social network will be more about promoting and going back to this idea that you have a home that you control online. Could be your blog, could be your Bandcamp, it could be whatever you want. And then you have all this amazing technology that allows you to communicate and create. So I think what's happening right now after like a few years of hyper centralization is we're going to start looking at new ways of communicating, and Clubhouse is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure there's going to be so much more happening in the coming years.
Thank you. I'm also curious, about your perspective on how of a niche topic it is, like how mainstream it is to cover those aspects. I'm really curious, very honestly, wondering when you're reaching out on Twitter openly on what you're building with your team, like how is the engagement? Like, is it something that you see growing in terms of, let's say, popularity, or is it still something that is very niche and that's only, let's say, a certain, profile of users who are very aware of their privacy or very careful about, those questions? Like, how much of a mainstream topic are we discussing right now?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing about working on the design side of what at Twitter we call health is that people are visual, right? You can give people all these policies and all these words, but if they're not able to understand exactly what they're experiencing behind basic internet policies. Like, when was the last time any of us ever read something like if Lyft or Uber updates their terms of services? We just all click and go. But if you're showing somebody visually what is happening and they're able to then reply, no, actually, I would like the ability to kind of more manage my toxic replies or manage my audience or unmention myself. A lot of the things that Tariq is talking about are actually embedded in these 3 pillars that we are working within and trying to build within. And I think that there's something to be said about the fact that we are seeing people even drawing up like mocks and showing us what they would like to see. And I think part of it is, as you're rolling things out, and even speaking to something Tariq said earlier around the fact that we've gotten to this point of hyper growth with technology where people want smaller communities, as you're building things out, if you can start to engage customers at the onset of your build, you can build something that is more inclusive. But if you're rolling things out without having multiple different voices or giving people the opinion to understand your thinking, then it's going to be very limited. And so I think what we're finding is that we're very pleasantly surprised to find, maybe because it is Twitter and it's where the public conversation happens, but people want to talk about these issues. People want a better platform. People have ideas. We obviously have ideas because we work in this, but if you're a power user or even a soft user, you know how you want to kind of feel on a platform. And that's why you have people leaving certain other platforms. They may not be able to pinpoint what they don't like, but they know they don't want to feel like they don't have control over their social media life, and they don't have control over the communities that they're engaging in. And so I think that it's a very interesting concept, and I think that we're showing some positive interactions on the onset of it.
Thank you, Tariq. I see you noting.
No, I think first of all, I think that the fact that someone like Jennifer is at Twitter and this subject is actually being held there is actually a sign and a good, it's quite a positive thing. And I just wanted to go back to the idea of, what you said about how big it is. If you think about it, 30 years ago, the idea of organic food was a bunch of hippies buying food at this that thing, like, why do we need organic food? And now, as you know, because we live in the same country, there's not a single supermarket anywhere in France and anywhere in Europe that doesn't have an organic section and locally trade product. And the reason, if you ask the supermarket owners, they say, oh, it's not a marketing thing. It's if we don't have that, people don't come and don't buy. So it's interesting to see how, ideas can start small, but the direction is to be going to more ethics, because computing is part of our lives. It's not going to go away. And as we are what we eat, we also are what we consume online. And what we consume online needs to become more ethical, more digestible. And that's the kind of direction where I think everyone is going to have to go.
I have a follow-up question regarding regulations and the fact that it's very much localized. Even if we're talking about a global platform, in the US, certain regulations apply. In Europe, other regulations apply. What are kind of the latest, changes that have been made both in the US and Europe? Do they get us closer to the goals that you're pursuing, both of you, with the Slow Web Initiative and the health practice at Twitter?
Yeah, well, this is actually a very interesting topic, right? And it kind of, for me, when I think about regulation, I think a lot about privacy, because different countries have different standards for privacy. For example, if I'm a woman in Saudi Arabia using Twitter, what I consider privacy is going to be very different than maybe like a typical American woman in New York City and what she considers privacy, just because of our backgrounds. So I think that I personally don't think that we should aim to try and turn these platforms into these huge nation states. There still needs to be an interaction with governments, and also thinking about culture, because culture is not monolithic, and a platform can't represent the culture of everyone. And so I think that it's important for countries that have specific guidelines in their laws to also see how those laws can be implemented on the internet. And I think it's challenging, because then how do you design for privacy for a woman in New York City versus a woman in Saudi Arabia? But we need to think about that. We need to give people and consumers across universally access to what they need and what their governments feel is appropriate. Because again, culture is different, and the internet and it's just a huge cultural experiment. So we can't expect that all the rules apply to everyone.
Yes. Sorry. I was going to say, first, I think regulation is good. I think we should. I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing for the big companies. It's a good thing for society. I think at some point, it's a good way to rebalance. I think we needed to do something because the internet hasn't been regulated for years, and we've seen some abuse. I think regulation is also good for startups because it's going to allow new opportunities to exist. If you remember, after Internet Explorer was detached from Windows, the Web 2.0, but I was big part of with NetVibes actually happened because of that. Mozilla, Google, Facebook, and other companies. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and I totally agree with you, Jennifer, is that the internet is highly cultural. And in some ways, with the Slow Web Initiative, what I'm trying to do is that in between the US-centric internet that is really tied to the cultural approach of the internet from in the US, the Chinese internet that is an internet of its own with its own rules that we not always believe is what we want to be in. I believe there's a room for an internet vision of Europe. And I think that in the same way that Europe has a different take on food, a different take on life, a different take on so many things, that is also a reason a lot of people love to live in Europe. I think online, but is now a majority of our lives. We need to figure out what makes us European online and what's the rules. I think the GDPR was the first step, but I think there's more, and especially around privacy. I think we believe in Europe that privacy is a human right. So this is something I think we need to make progress on.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about what you're saying is that that standard can influence other countries too. Because I think that with GDPR, it's not a coincidence to me that GDPR and a lot of the issues that some other social media companies have had in recent years kind of coincided. That timeline of GDPR and those issues was very, very close, because GDPR also allowed for people to start having some tougher conversations around things that were happening kind of more so in the dark. So I think that it's important because it starts to create standards across the board, and it starts to challenge things that people are just accepting. I think for me, this is a very interesting fact, but I think a lot about, when I think about the internet changing, I think a lot about Domino's Pizza. Because Domino's Pizza was one of the first kind of restaurants to allow you to order online. And that changed everything. That small thing changed everything. So now you're able to just quickly get something and consume. And that opens up the floodgates. So what else can I do online? And what else can I do? And that question changes as the world changes. Even the fact that we're having this conversation this way, I don't think, 10 years ago, having an online conference would be something that is a standard, but we have to be open to the world changing, but we definitely need to have regulations and think about the repercussions of the world changing.
Thank you. I want to ask you one more question to both of you in terms of you see, I've tried to figure out, is it something, if let's say I'm a founder starting, my company right now, and I'm trying to build things the way I should, in the ethical way. I feel like this is, again, I'm going to repeat a bit what we discussed earlier. It feels like something where it's both an opportunity, but also a threat, because I'm just starting, I'm smaller, and I have to apply to myself a bunch of rules that will maybe, impede me from tracking my users better and have some growth, hacking techniques, whatever you want to call it. You get the point. Starting now as a founder, why should I follow those principles? Please convince me.
I can take this really quick. For me, I think a lot about where the beauty industry has gone in the past 5 years. You see that there's a lot of financial benefit in being inclusive. So for years ago, if you started a company, you're like, I don't want to make all these different shades of makeup. But then you have someone like Rihanna and Fenty and how they revolutionized and made things more inclusive. So you have even smaller beauty lines kind of understanding that even though it might be a bigger hurdle to come out with more options and to think about these type of things in the onset, in the long run, you're playing more of a long run game where if you think about these things earlier, as you have hyper growth, you're actually doing yourself a service. So I think the more inclusive you can be, the better, because if the more inclusive you are, the more different types of users and the more users you're going to have. And I think that that's something to be said, even for the internet, in terms of social media. We need to be designing not just for one group of people or a certain country, a certain demographic. If we can start to think about these problems more collectively, even though it's challenging, in the long run, we're doing ourselves a service on the business side, and I think honestly on the social side.
Tariq, convince me too, please.
Well, I first of all, I truly believe that building a great product takes time. It takes time before building it, takes time while doing it, and while growing. I do not believe in shortcuts. I know that some people manage to get through it, and a lot of people believe that's the general way of doing things. But I do not believe. I think that at some point, the one thing you need to do is first do a great product. Second, you have to treat your customers the way you would like to be treated. I know that because of a lot of tools we don't really control. You can start spamming people with SMS, emails, etc. I think the process in some ways is the way you do things is your marketing. Look about food right now. All the things we love, nobody's coming with talking points. We just see how it's made, the people who are making it, how they're making it, and we're like convinced, wow, this is great. There's a new bakery that opened next to my place. I switched instantly. Why? Because I saw how they drink bread. I tasted this, and I said, okay, this is my new best friend. And I asked them, how do you do that? And they said, oh, we have this guy who's doing a great thing, and then this guy is doing a great thing. We have the best flour, we have this and that and that. And suddenly you discover there's an entire new ecosystem of people doing great stuff, quality in wine and all of this in the food. And I think in technology is going to be the same. You're going to be great because you're going to also cooperate with other people who are doing great stuff, are passionate, and suddenly you reassemble something that actually makes sense. And I think we need to rediscover the internet the way, 15, 30 years ago when we started, we discovered this with this idea of quality first, and again, respecting the end user, the way you want to treat people, the way you are going to be treated. It actually, as you said, Jennifer, it means being inclusive, but inclusivity means also diversity of software, of people who building software, etc. So it is. I think all the bricks are here now. We just need to put them together and get forward
and start building. Thank you. You're actually giving me like a very positive, ending note that I was looking forward to. Do you want to say just one last word? Where can we find you online? What can we ask you or talk to you about, Jennifer?
Yeah, so on Twitter, I'm at Jen Can Do That, and that's Can with a K. And you could also find me on LinkedIn with my full name. And I would also just suggest that if anyone's interested in the topic of technology and hypergrowth, I just recently read and also welcomed her to chat at Twitter. Dr. Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology, is an excellent book around some of the topics that Tariq and myself covered today. And it's really great to continue to really learn from the people who are studying this new world that we're living in.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining us. Tariq.
So on Twitter, it's very easy, at Tariq Krim. Actually, my email is tariq@krim.com, so it's also easy. And Slow Web Initiative, you can go at slowweb.io. And for Polite, Technology with Good Manners, you go to polite.one. And here it is. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great evening and a great day, each of you, and see you very soon.